I walk past a church every single day now, and every time I do, my chest tightens like someone's squeezing my lungs with both hands. Because 20 years ago, I promised God everything. And 3 months ago, I broke that promise in the front seat of a truck on Highway 40 with a man whose name I didn't even know yet. And the worst part? I'd do it again. My name is Mia, and I need to tell you what I did before someone else does. Before my sister finds out the real reason I left the convent. Before my mother learns why I can't look her in the eyes anymore. Before the woman I was dies completely, and there's nothing left to confess. I entered the Sisters of Mercy when I was 19 years old. Not because I was running from something, like people always assume. I genuinely felt called. I felt God's presence so strongly during Mass one Sunday that I couldn't breathe, couldn't think about anything else for weeks. My mother cried when I told her. Happy tears, she said. Her daughter, a bride of Christ. My father didn't say much, just held my hand across the dinner table and nodded. My younger sister Emma looked at me like I'd announced I was moving to Mars. The convent in Vermont was everything I thought I wanted. Structure, purpose, silence that felt holy instead of empty. I taught at the Catholic school attached to our order, 4th graders mostly, teaching them about saints and salvation while wearing a full habit that made me invisible and untouchable. I liked being invisible. I liked that men didn't look at me, that I didn't have to think about my body or what it wanted or what it meant to want anything at all. 20 years. I was 39 years old and I'd never kissed anyone. Never held hands with someone who made my stomach flip. Never stayed up all night talking about nothing. Never felt that terrifying rush of wanting someone so badly you'd destroy your own life just to be close to them, until the truck broke down. It was late September, one of those perfect fall days in New England where the leaves are so bright they almost hurt to look at. I'd been given permission to visit my mother in Boston. She'd had a minor surgery and needed help for a few days. Sister Catherine drove me to the bus station in Burlington, and I remember feeling grateful for the break from routine, even though I felt guilty about feeling grateful. The bus never came. There was an accident on I-89, they announced after 2 hours of waiting. All buses canceled for the day. I stood there in my habit with my small travel bag, trying to figure out what to do. I couldn't call my mother, she was recovering and would just worry. I couldn't go back to the convent without explaining why. And I couldn't afford a hotel even if I wanted one, which I didn't because that felt too worldly, too much like admitting I was enjoying this tiny bit of freedom. Stay with me. The next part is where everything changes. And I need you to understand I didn't plan any of this. I need you to believe me. There was a man at the bus station, mid-40s maybe, wearing work clothes covered in sawdust. He'd been on his phone, pacing, clearly frustrated about something. When the cancellation was announced, he swore under his breath and then saw me standing there. His eyes went to my habit and something in his expression shifted, softened. You trying to get to Boston too? He asked. I nodded. I should have walked away right then. I should have called Sister Catherine and asked her to come back. But I didn't. I'm driving down, he said, heading to Framingham for a job tomorrow morning. I can drop you wherever you need. I knew the rules. I knew accepting rides from strange men violated about 15 different protocols. But something in me, some part that had been sleeping for 20 years, whispered that this was just a practical solution, that God would understand, that sometimes necessity trumps protocol. Thank you, I heard myself say. That would be very helpful. His name was Daniel. I learned that in the first 5 minutes of the drive. He was a carpenter, divorced, 2 kids he saw every other weekend. He talked easily, asking gentle questions that didn't feel invasive. What did I teach? Did I like Vermont? Had I always wanted to be a nun? That last question. I should have just said yes. Instead, I paused too long, and he glanced over at me with these deep brown eyes that seemed to actually see me despite the habit, despite everything designed to make me invisible. Sometimes I wonder, I said, and immediately wanted to take it back. But he just nodded. I think everyone wonders about the paths they didn't take. We drove in silence for a while after that. Comfortable silence. The kind of silence I'd never experienced before because convent silence is different. It's performative. It's supposed to bring you closer to God. This was just two people existing in the same space without needing to fill it with noise. And then somewhere around White River Junction, something happened that I still can't fully explain. Daniel's phone rang. He glanced at it and his whole body tensed. He didn't answer. It rang again. And again. On the fourth call, he pulled over onto the shoulder of the highway and just sat there, gripping the steering wheel so hard his knuckles went white. "I'm sorry," he said. "I just need a minute." I didn't ask what was wrong. I just waited. And then, without thinking, without planning, without any of the careful consideration that had governed every choice I'd made for 2 decades, I reached over and put my hand on his shoulder. He turned to look at me, and I saw actual tears in his eyes. This grown man, this stranger, crying in front of me, and something in my chest cracked open like an egg. "My daughter," he said. "She's in the hospital. My ex-wife just told me. Some kind of accident at school and I'm 3 hours away and she won't let me talk to her because it's not my weekend and I don't know if she's okay and I don't know what to do." I should have prayed with him. That's what a nun does. That's what I was supposed to do. Instead, I squeezed his shoulder and said, "Drive. I'll help you figure it out. If you think you know where this is going, stay with me, because you don't. Not yet." He called the hospital while I drove. Yes, I drove. I took the wheel of this stranger's truck on Highway 40 while he frantically tried to get information about his daughter. And sitting there in the driver's seat, wearing my habit but doing something so completely outside my controlled little world, I felt more alive than I had in 20 years. His daughter was fine. Broken arm, some stitches, but fine. The relief that washed over his face made something warm bloom in my chest. Something I didn't have a name for because I'd spent 2 decades pretending feelings like that didn't exist. We pulled into a rest stop so he could collect himself. I went inside to use the bathroom, and when I came out, I stood in front of the mirror for a long time, staring at myself in the full habit, trying to recognize the woman underneath all that fabric and devotion. When I got back to the truck, Daniel was leaning against the side of it, looking out at the mountains. The sun was starting to set, and everything was gold and orange and almost unbearably beautiful. "Thank you," he said when he saw me. "I mean it. You didn't have to do any of that." "Of course I did," I said. And then, because something reckless had woken up inside me, I added, "We're supposed to help each other. That's the whole point, isn't it?" He smiled. Not a polite smile or a grateful smile. A real smile that reached his eyes and made me feel like he was seeing something in me that even I didn't know was there. "Can I ask you something?" he said. I should have said no. "Okay. Are you happy?" The question hit me like a physical blow. No one had ever asked me that. Not in 20 years. Not once. Because happiness wasn't the point. Service was the point. Devotion was the point. Sacrifice was the point. "I don't know," I whispered. And then he did something that changed everything. He stepped forward and pulled me into a hug. Just a hug. His arms around me, my face pressed against his chest, his chin resting on top of my head. Nothing inappropriate. Nothing that would violate any actual rule if you described it clinically. But I felt it everywhere. Every single cell in my body woke up and screamed. Because I'd spent 20 years not being touched like that, not being held by someone who wanted to hold me, not feeling another human being's heartbeat against mine. I don't know how long we stood there. Long enough that when we finally pulled apart, the sun had nearly set and the rest stop was almost empty, and I knew with absolute certainty that I was in serious trouble. And here's what I need you to understand, what I need someone to understand, because everyone's going to judge me, and I can't stop them, but I can at least try to explain. It wasn't about sex. It wasn't about lust. It was about being seen. Actually seen. Not as Sister Mary Mia, not as a vessel for God's work, not as a teacher or a daughter or anyone's idea of what I should be. Just as Mia, just as a woman who was lonely and lost and had convinced herself for 20 years that those feelings didn't matter. Stay with me. Because what I did next is what I can never take back. We got back in the truck, and neither of us spoke. The air felt heavy, charged with something I'd only read about in books. He started driving again, and I sat there with my hands folded in my lap, trying to pray, trying to find the words that would bring me back to myself, back to God, back to safety. But all I could think about was that hug, the warmth of it, the solidity of another person wanting to comfort me. The way it felt to matter to someone outside the structure and rules that had defined my entire adult life. "I should probably tell you," Daniel said quietly, "that I haven't stopped thinking about you since you got in my truck." My heart stopped. Actually stopped. I couldn't breathe. "I know that's wrong," he continued. "I know you're a nun, and I know there are rules, and I know I should just shut up and drive you to Boston and forget this ever happened. But I don't want to forget it happened. I don't want to forget you." I should have told him to stop talking. I should have asked him to take me to the nearest convent. I should have gotten out of the truck and called Sister Catherine and confessed everything. Instead, I said, "I don't want to forget this either. And God help me, I meant it." He pulled off at the next exit. Not to a hotel, nothing like that. Just to a quiet overlook where you could see the whole valley stretched out below. All those tiny lights from towns and houses where people were living normal lives, making normal choices, not throwing away everything they'd built because of one hug and a few hours in a truck. We sat there as darkness fell completely, and we talked. Really talked. He told me about his divorce, about how he'd stopped believing in anything after his wife left, about how his kids were the only thing keeping him going some days. I told him about the convent, about the silence, about how I'd convinced myself I was serving God, but maybe I'd just been hiding from life. "Do you believe in God?" I asked him at some point. He thought about it. "I believe in moments that feel bigger than us, like this one." This is where I could have stopped it. This is where I should have stopped it. Instead, I reached over and took his hand, just held his hand, fingers intertwined, sitting in his truck on the side of a highway in the dark, holding hands like teenagers. And I felt it. That thing everyone writes songs about and makes movies about and goes crazy trying to find. That connection, that spark, that sense of falling and flying at the same time. "I need to tell you something," I said, and my voice was shaking. "I've never done this before. Any of this. I've never held someone's hand. I've never felt like this. I don't know what I'm doing." He squeezed my hand. Neither do I. We sat there for another hour, just talking and holding hands and watching the lights below. And with every minute that passed, I felt the life I'd built for 20 years crumbling behind me like a sandcastle at high tide. When he finally started the truck again and pulled back onto the highway, I knew I'd crossed a line I couldn't uncross. But I didn't ask him to take me back. I didn't call the convent. I didn't pray for forgiveness. I just sat there next to him, our hands still joined across the center console, and drove toward Boston with no idea what I was going to do when we got there. He dropped me at my mother's house just after midnight. We sat in the truck outside for a long time, neither of us wanting to move, neither of us wanting to end whatever this was. "Can I see you again?" he asked. I should have said no. I should have said this was a mistake. I should have said goodbye and walked away and tried to forget it ever happened. "Yes," I whispered. He wrote his number on a piece of paper and handed it to me. I took it and held it like it was something precious and dangerous, which it was. "I know what you're giving up if you call me," he said. "I know what I'm asking, so don't do it unless you're sure." I nodded, got out of the truck, walked to my mother's door, turned back one last time and saw him watching me with an expression I couldn't read but felt in my bones. That night I lay in my childhood bedroom and stared at the ceiling. My mother was asleep down the hall. My habit was folded carefully on the chair. The piece of paper with Daniel's number was in my pocket, and I knew, with absolute certainty, that I was going to call him. But what I didn't know yet, what I couldn't have possibly known, was that someone had already seen us. Someone from the convent had been driving by that rest stop. Someone who would make a phone call that would end everything. And I still called him anyway. The next morning, I helped my mother with breakfast like nothing had changed, made her tea, helped her get comfortable on the couch, put on a mass recording for her to watch, all while feeling like I was moving through water, like I wasn't quite in my body anymore. Around noon, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. My hands shook as I answered. Sister Mary Mia, this is Mother Superior. Her voice was ice. We need to speak about your trip yesterday, immediately. My blood went cold. Of course, Mother. Is something wrong? Someone saw you at a rest stop on Highway 40, in a truck, with a man. Each word was a hammer blow. And they say you embraced him. I couldn't speak, couldn't think, couldn't come up with any lie or excuse that would make this okay. Come back to the convent today, she continued. We'll discuss your future here. She hung up before I could respond. I stood there in my mother's kitchen, still wearing my habit, holding a phone that suddenly felt like a bomb in my hand. They knew. Not everything, but enough. Enough to question my vows. Enough to question my commitment. Enough to take away the only identity I'd had for 20 years. And here's what I did next. Here's the choice that I'll have to live with forever. I looked at that piece of paper with Daniel's number on it. I thought about the hug, the hand-holding, the feeling of being seen, the possibility of a life where I wasn't invisible, where I wasn't Sister Mary Mia, but just Mia, just a woman with desires and dreams and the right to be happy. And I called him. I need to see you, I said when he answered. Right now, today, before I lose my nerve. He picked me up 2 hours later. I didn't tell my mother where I was going. Just said I needed some air, needed to pray. She smiled and told me to take my time, completely unaware that her daughter was about to blow up her entire life. Daniel drove us back to that overlook. Daylight this time, everything visible and real. No darkness to hide in, no excuses about getting caught up in a moment. They know, I told him. Someone saw us. I'm supposed to go back to the convent today. He went pale. I'm so sorry. God, I'm so sorry. This is my fault. No. I grabbed his hands, held them tight. It's not your fault, it's mine. Because I don't want to go back. The words hung in the air between us. One said they couldn't be unsaid. Once admitted, I couldn't pretend anymore. Mia, he said carefully. Are you sure? Because if you actually leave, you can't do it for me. You can't do it because we held hands one time and I made you feel something. You have to do it for you. And that's when I realized he understood. He understood this wasn't about romance or rebellion. This was about me finally admitting I'd made a mistake 20 years ago. That I'd hidden behind God and devotion because I was scared of living. That I'd convinced myself I was sacrificing for something holy when really I was just too afraid to want anything. I'm sure, I said. And I was. What happened next is harder to explain because it happened slowly and all at once. I went back to the convent that evening. I sat down with Mother Superior, and I told her the truth. Not about Daniel specifically. Not about holding hands or feelings I couldn't name. Just that I'd realized after 20 years that I wasn't called to this life anymore. That I needed to leave. That my vows, spoken in good faith at 19, no longer reflected who I was at 39. She looked at me with something like pity. Sister, this is clearly a moment of weakness. Of temptation. Return to prayer. Return to your sisters. This will pass. It won't pass, I said quietly, because I don't want it to pass. The next week was a blur. Meetings with Mother Superior, conversations with the bishop, counseling sessions where priests tried to talk me out of throwing away my vows, my mother crying, begging me to reconsider, Emma, my sister, angry and confused, asking why I'd waste 20 years just to quit now. And through it all, Daniel, not pushing, not demanding, just there, waiting, giving me space to make this decision on my own while also reminding me that I didn't have to be alone anymore if I didn't want to be. I left the Sisters of Mercy on October 15th, 3 weeks after that truck ride. I walked out wearing regular clothes for the first time in 2 decades. Jeans and a sweater Emma had bought me. My hair, which had been covered for so long, was streaked with gray I hadn't known was there. I felt naked, exposed, terrified, and free. But here's what they don't tell you about leaving everything behind for a second chance at life. Here's what no one warns you about. My mother stopped speaking to me, said I'd brought shame on our family, that she couldn't look at me without crying. Emma tried to understand, but I could see the distance growing between us, the way she looked at me like I was a stranger. The school I'd taught at for 15 years asked me not to visit. Too confusing for the children, they said. Too complicated to explain. And Daniel? We tried. God, we tried. We dated like normal people, went to dinners, watched movies, held hands in public where anyone could see. But I was carrying too much guilt, too much grief, too much anger at myself for wasting 20 years, too much terror that I'd made another wrong choice just in the opposite direction. We lasted 4 months, and when it ended, when I stood in his apartment in Framingham and told him I couldn't do this, that I needed to figure out who I was before I could be with anyone, he just hugged me one more time and said he understood. That was 2 months ago. And now I'm living in a studio apartment in Portland, working at a bookstore, wearing normal clothes, making normal choices, being normal, except nothing feels normal. Everything feels strange and wrong and right all at the same time. I walk past churches and I feel that pull, that muscle memory of devotion. But I don't go in, can't go in, because I don't know anymore what I believe or who I'm supposed to be or if leaving was brave or selfish or both. My mother still won't talk to me. Emma texts occasionally, but it's surface-level stuff. How are you? Weather's nice. Hope you're well. Daniel sent me a message last week. His daughter's arm healed perfectly. He's been promoted to head carpenter at his company. He's been seeing someone new, someone without all my baggage, someone who can just be happy without making it so complicated. I was happy for him. I was. But I also cried for 3 hours after reading that message. Because maybe he was my one chance. Maybe that hug and the rest stop was the universe offering me an escape route and I took it, but then panicked and threw it away because I'm too broken to know how to be happy. Or maybe I did the right thing. Maybe leaving the convent was the first honest choice I'd made in 20 years and everything else. All the pain and loss and loneliness is just the price of finally being real. I don't know. I genuinely don't know. What I do know is this. I can't go back. The person I was is gone. Sister Mary Mia doesn't exist anymore. The convent wouldn't take me back even if I wanted to return, which I don't, I think. And I can't go forward either because I don't know where forward is. I don't know what I'm supposed to do with a life that I'm building from scratch at 40 years old. So I'm just here. In this, in-between space. Not a nun. Not quite a civilian. Not anything. Just Mia. And some days, that's enough. Some days I wake up and feel grateful that I get to choose what to wear and what to eat and whether to talk or be silent. Some days I walk through Portland and see couples holding hands, and instead of feeling empty, I feel hopeful that maybe someday I'll figure out how to do that without panicking. But other days, I walk past a church and hear the hymns and smell the incense, and I want to fall to my knees and beg God to tell me if I made a mistake, if I threw away something sacred for something that might not even exist, and God doesn't answer. Or maybe he does, and I'm just too lost to hear it anymore. Here's what I need to know, and I'm asking you because I can't ask anyone in my real life. Did I do the right thing? Was one hug worth 20 years of devotion? Was feeling seen for a few hours worth losing my family, my community, my identity? Or am I just selfish, just weak, just someone who couldn't handle the sacrifice that real devotion requires? Because I look back at that moment in the truck, at Daniel's arms around me, at the way I felt my entire life shift on its axis, and I can't decide if that was awakening or destruction. Maybe it was both. Maybe that's the thing no one tells you about making choices that change everything. There's no clear right or wrong, just consequences. Just grief and hope mixed together so thoroughly you can't separate them anymore. I saw Daniel one more time after we broke up. Ran into him at a coffee shop in Framingham when I was visiting Emma. He looked good, happy. He introduced me to his girlfriend, a kind woman who laughed easily and touched his arm while she talked. We chatted for a few minutes. Normal small talk. How are you? What are you doing now? Hope things are going well. And when they left, when I watched them walk out together, I felt something complicated. Not quite jealousy, not quite regret. Something more like gratitude mixed with sadness. Because he gave me something no one else ever had, permission to want more than what I'd convinced myself was enough. And now I have to figure out what to do with that gift. So here I am, 40 years old. No family who'll speak to me. No Daniel, no convent, no God that I can feel anymore. Just me and this bookstore and this studio apartment and this wild, terrifying freedom that I chose and that I'm still not sure I deserve. And I keep asking myself, if I could go back to that bus station in Burlington, knowing everything I know now, would I still get in that truck? I think I would. I think I'd do it all again, even knowing what it cost, even knowing I'd lose everything, because at least now when I look in the mirror, I see someone. Not Sister Mary Mia, not my mother's good Catholic daughter, not a vessel for anyone else's expectations, just Mia, scared, lonely, lost, but real. And maybe that's enough. Maybe that has to be enough. Or maybe I'm still making excuses for being selfish. I don't know. If you've stayed with me this long, if you've listened to this whole confession, I need you to do something for me. I need you to tell me in the comments, what would you have done? If you'd spent 20 years in a life that was safe and structured and holy, and then someone showed you a glimpse of something else, something warm and human and real, would you have stayed or would you have left? Because I need to know I'm not the only person who would burn down their whole life for one moment of feeling truly seen. I need to know I'm not the only one who would choose chaos over safety if it meant finally being honest. And I need to know if there's a way forward from here that doesn't feel like I'm constantly choosing between who I was and who I might become. Hit subscribe if you want to follow what happens next. Because I don't know where this story ends yet. I don't know if I'll find my way back to faith or forward to something else. I don't know if I'll ever speak to my mother again or if Emma will ever look at me the way she used to. I don't know if I'll find someone else who makes me feel the way Daniel did, or if that was my one shot, and I'll spend the rest of my life wondering what could have been. All I know is that I made a choice, and I have to live with it. And some days, when the sun hits the buildings in Portland just right, and I'm walking to work at the bookstore, and I feel the weight of 20 years lifting off my shoulders for just a moment, I think maybe I'm going to be okay. And other days I'm not sure I'll ever be okay again. But at least it's my choice now. At least it's my life. And maybe, eventually, that will be enough. So tell me, what would you have done? Because I'm still trying to figure out if I made the right choice or if I just made a choice and now I have to live with it. And the scary thing is, I'm not sure there's a difference anymore.